"He won't eat." The aide said it quietly, but the words carried down the corridor. Ilsa heard them from the nurse's station and did not look up from the chart in her hands. She had already heard the same report 3 times that morning. Ward 7 was bright with late October light. It came in flat and gold through tall windows on the east wall and lay across the linoleum in long rectangles. Ilsa stood at the edge of one of those rectangles and turned the chart over in her hands. Corporal Corvin Hale, 29 years old, Marine Infantry. Discharged 6 days ago from the surgical wing and transferred here. 6 days, and he had not cooperated with a single intake assessment, had not answered questions during rounds, had not touched a meal tray, had not, according to anyone's notes, spoken a complete sentence to anyone in the building. He was not unresponsive. That was the thing. He sat up. He tracked movement. He simply refused to let anyone in. What nobody there knew was that Ilsa had a reason for taking his chart herself, a reason she had not mentioned to anyone, and that the reason had a name. We are glad you are here. This channel exists for the stories that almost did not get told, the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones where the most important thing that happened was something a room full of people almost missed. If that is the kind of story that matters to you, we would love for you to stay. And while you are here, we want to ask, has an animal ever reached someone you love in a way that nothing else could? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. Ilsa Voss was 34 years old. She wore her dark brown hair pinned close at the back of her neck, a few strands loose at her temples the way they always were by mid-shift. Her eyes were the particular gray that looks blue in some lights and green in others, and rarely looks like anything as simple as gray. She wore her scrubs in navy blue, and on her left wrist, she wore a single narrow band of braided cord, sun-faded, that she never took off and never explained. She picked up the chart and walked toward room 7. Corvin Hale was sitting by the window when Ilsa pushed the door open. He had a thin hospital blanket across his lap. His hands were resting on his knees, palms down. He was broad-shouldered in the way that comes from years of work and not from effort alone, and he had been handsome before the hollows opened under his cheekbones. His hair was dark and cut short in the way the Corps left it. His eyes, when he turned to look at her, were dark brown and entirely still. He did not speak. Ilsa closed the door behind her. She did not rush toward him. She pulled the chair from the corner, set it 2 feet from his own chair, and sat down. She put the chart on her knee, open, but she did not look at it. "I'm Ilsa," she said. "I'm the nurse on this hall." He looked back at the window. She did not fill the silence. She let it sit there between them, which was harder than it sounded. Outside, a sparrow moved along the window ledge and was gone. "You have not eaten since Tuesday," she said finally, not as an accusation. "Nothing. That's okay," she said. "I'm not here about the food." He turned and looked at her again, just briefly. A flicker, then back to the window. She sat with him for 12 minutes by the clock on the wall. She did not try to take his blood pressure. She did not open the chart. When she stood to leave, she said only, "I'll be back tomorrow," and he did not answer, and she did not need him to. What none of the staff had noticed, because it was in a file no one had pulled, was what Ilsa had seen in an old attached note at the back of his intake paperwork. A single handwritten line from the previous facility. It read, "He was a handler. His dog's name was Bram." She had read that line and sat very still for a moment. Then she had made a phone call. Ilsa had worked Ward 7 for 4 years. She was the nurse who arrived early and stayed late without announcing either one. She was the nurse who remembered which patients wanted the blinds up in the morning and which ones needed the room dark. She was the nurse who learned, within a day of any admission, how each person liked their call light responded to, and she responded to them that way without being asked to change. She was also the nurse who kept a handwritten list in the pocket of her scrubs. Not of tasks. She never missed a task. The list was of things patients had mentioned once, in passing, that they seemed to believe nobody had retained. A sister in Portland who used to send cookies. a song on the radio that reminded someone of basic training, a dog's name mentioned in a half-sleep. She wrote those things down so she would not be the person who forgot them. The patients who had been on her ward the longest tended to receive small deliveries. An extra blanket in the right weight, a paperback left on the nightstand in a genre she had remembered from one sentence. A cup of coffee made the way they took it before anyone had thought to offer a different way. She never told anyone she did this. Her colleague Preeta Menon was the person who noticed most. Preeta was a compact, quick-moving woman with short black hair and an indignation like a warm fire. She had worked beside Ilse for 3 of those 4 years, and she had, over time, assembled a picture of what Ilse actually did when no one was looking. "You're in early again," Preeta said, the morning after Ilse first visited Corvin's room. "I had a few things to check." "You always have a few things to check." Preeta tilted her head. "Hale?" Ilse set down her coffee. "His vitals are stable." "That's not what I asked." Ilse smiled, small and sideways. "I know." She had made the phone call the evening before. It had taken 4 transfers and 1 very tired sergeant at a kennel facility 2 states away before she reached the right person. That person told her that Bram was a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, retired from service 8 months prior due to a joint evaluation. He had been placed with a foster family, approved by the program, but had not, the sergeant said, settled well. The foster family had actually called twice. Ilse wrote down the sergeant's name and the kennel address. She said, "Is there a process for a temporary compassionate placement?" There was a pause on the line. Not exactly a formal one. "I'm not looking for formal," she said. "You'd need medical approval and a facility waiver." She already knew who to ask. She did not tell Preeta the full plan. She told her only that she had made some calls. Preeta looked at her for a long moment. "You know the charge nurse is going to say no." "I know. You're going to ask anyway." "I am." Preeta laughed, short and soft. "All right. What do you need from me?" The charge nurse on Ward 7 was a man named Dennis Fairburn, tall and precise, with the kind of confidence that comes from having been right in meetings a statistically significant number of times. He was not unkind. He was, in his own view, reasonable. He ran his ward carefully, and he did not like departures from established protocol, not because he distrusted change, but because he had seen too many ad hoc interventions create paperwork that nobody planned for. He had already written a note in Corvin's chart that read, "Patient uncooperative. Consider transfer to psychological evaluation unit. Review in 72 hours." Ilse read that note. She did not comment on it to anyone. On the morning of day 7, she went to Dennis's office and stood in the doorway. "I have a request," she said. He gestured for her to sit. She did. She laid out what she knew about Corvin and what she had arranged, calmly, without editorializing. She told him about the dog. She told him about the foster placement and the twice-made calls from the foster family. She told him she had already contacted the program liaison and that the sergeant in charge was willing to facilitate a transport with paperwork filed correctly. Dennis listened. He sat back. He picked up a pen and set it down. "A dog," he said. "A military working dog," she said. "His dog, specifically. This is not that kind of facility. There is precedent," she said. "Under Therapeutic Visitation Protocol, section." "I know the section," Dennis said. Silence. He looked at the chart she had placed on his desk. He looked at it for a longer time than felt comfortable. 1 hour, he said finally. "Controlled visit. You are present the entire time. If there is any disruption, there won't be. You don't know that." "No," she said. "I don't." He clicked his pen once, twice. "File it correctly. I want the forms done before the animal enters the building." She stood. "Thank you." He looked back at his desk before she reached the door. "Ilse," he said. She turned. "If this goes badly," he said, "it goes in the notes." She nodded. "I understand." She left his office and walked directly to the supply closet at the end of the hall, where she stood for exactly 30 seconds with her eyes closed and her hand flat against the wall, and then she walked back to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. Bram arrived on a Thursday. He was brought in by the program liaison, a quiet man named Sergeant Ellery Marsh, who had driven 4 hours and who smelled faintly of engine oil and dog fur. Bram walked at his left side on a short lead, ears forward, alert. He was tawny and black, dense-coated, with the kind of attentiveness that looks like intelligence because it is. He scanned the corridor with professional calm. He did not pull. He did not bark. Ilsa met them at the staff entrance on the east side. Morning light came through the glass doors in long, pale bars. "He remember anything from a medical facility?" she asked. "He's done clinics," Marsh said. "He's steady." She led them through the side corridor, the longer way around, to avoid the main ward. "Does Corporal Hale know?" Marsh asked. "No," she said. Marsh looked at her. "I didn't want him to have time to say no," she said. Marsh considered this. He almost smiled. They paused outside room 7. Bram sat without being told. His ears moved once toward the door. Ilsa looked at Marsh. "Ready?" He nodded. She pushed the door open. Corvin was in the chair by the window again. Same position, blanket across his knees. The morning light was behind him, so his face was in mild shadow. He turned toward the door, with the same flat, patient stillness he always turned with. He saw Ilsa first. Then he saw what was behind her. His hands lifted off his knees. Bram made a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a whine. A short, certain syllable. Just one. Then he moved forward on the lead, not pulling but leaning, the way a working dog moves when it knows something. Corvin slid off the chair to his knees on the linoleum. No hesitation, no calculation. His hands came up, and Bram walked into them, and Corvin put his face against the side of the dog's neck and said nothing. For a long time, nobody moved. Preeta had appeared in the doorway without anyone noticing. Marsh stood very still near the wall, his hands still holding the lead, though there was no tension in it now. Ilsa stood 2 feet inside the door. She had seen a lot of things in 4 years on this ward. She had seen people receive news they had dreaded, and she had seen them take it with more grace than she thought possible. She had seen people go home after weeks when no one expected it. She had seen one man stand up after a month in a bed and walk to the window just to feel the light. She had not seen anything that looked like this. Corvin's shoulders moved. Just once. He pressed his forehead lower. Bram stood absolutely still under his hands, the way a working dog learns to stand when someone needs it, bearing weight without protest. No one spoke for 2 full minutes. Finally, Corvin lifted his head. His face was wet. He looked at Bram for a long moment, and then he looked at Ilsa. "How?" he said. That was all, just the one word. She did not rush the answer. "It took some calls," she said. He looked back at Bram. He ran one hand slowly along the dog's back, shoulder to flank, the way someone does who has done it thousands of times before. "He doesn't place well," Corvin said. His voice was low and rough from disuse. "I know," she said. "That's in his file too." Corvin looked at her again. Marsh cleared his throat gently from the wall. "He's been requesting your sector," Marsh said. "Every morning at roll call. Old habit. He just keeps presenting." Corvin looked at Marsh, and something moved behind his eyes that had not moved in 7 days. "You drove," Corvin said. 4 hours, Marsh said, "and change." Corvin nodded. It was a nod that carried more than a nod usually carries. Bram put his chin on Corvin's knee. Corvin's hand came to rest on top of the dog's head, light and still. "He'll need his rotation," Corvin said. "He doesn't do well without a schedule." "Tell me the rotation," Ilsa said. He told her. It took 8 minutes. He described it precisely, the way a person describes something they have run through in their head every day for 8 months, without anything to do with it. Morning movement, the drill sequence, rest intervals, preferred terrain for the afternoon work. He spoke with his eyes on Bram and his hand on the dog's head, and his voice came back to him as he talked, small increments of warmth at a time. When he finished, Ilsa had written it all down in her pocket notebook. He noticed that. He watched her write and said nothing. Then he said, "You write things down." "I do." "Why?" "Because people mention things once," she said, "and they shouldn't have to mention them twice." He was quiet. Then, very quietly, "Nobody has said that before." She capped the pen. "What would you like for breakfast?" He almost laughed. It did not quite get there, but it was closer than anything that had come from him in 7 days. "Something that isn't whatever was on that tray," he said. She asked Preeta to handle the rest of the hall that morning. Preeta was already crying, very quietly, into the sleeve of her scrub top in the corridor, which she denied later and which everyone agreed to accept. Bram stayed for 2 hours that first day. When Marsh clipped the lead back and stood, Corvin did not make a scene. He straightened. He thanked Marsh. He asked, with a steadiness that had not been there before, whether the arrangement could continue. Marsh looked at Ilsa. She looked at him. "File it under therapeutic contact," she said. "We have the protocol." "We do," Marsh said. The next morning, Corvin ate breakfast. It happened the way things happen when no one has been warned. It was already done before anyone thought to notice. Preeta walked past the room with a fresh water pitcher and stopped in the doorway. The tray was mostly cleared. Corvin was sitting upright, not slouched toward the window, actually upright, with his shoulders back in the way a person holds their shoulders when something in them has decided to continue. She told Ilsa. Ilsa set down the chart she was holding. "Good," she said. "Is that all you're going to say?" Ilsa thought about it. "Yes." Preeta made a sound of complete exasperation and went back to her rounds. What happened next was not planned. On the third morning of Bram's visits, Dennis Fairburn arrived earlier than his usual time. He came down the hall with a chart under his arm in the way he always walked, and he stopped outside room 7 because the door was partially open and there was a sound coming from inside. Not a bad sound. Something else. He pushed the door open an inch. Just an inch. Inside, Bram was standing at heel beside Corvin's chair. Corvin was speaking quietly, and the dog was tracking the sound of his voice, with the whole calm weight of his attention. 2 other patients from the ward had drifted to the open doorway earlier that morning, not because anyone invited them, but because the feeling in the room drew them the way warm air draws cold. They sat in the extra chairs, with the easy permission of people who are also recovering, and therefore understand the particular kindness of being in the same room as something good. Dennis stood in the hall. He watched for a full minute. Then he walked to the nurse's station. "Voss," he said. Ilsa looked up from the medication cart. "His chart," he said. "The psychological evaluation referral?" "Yes." He set the chart on the counter. He had put a line through the referral note. One clean line, corner to corner. "I'll need your documentation to support the change," he said. "I have it," she said. "I've had it since Tuesday." He looked at her. "I'll put it on your desk," she said. He picked up the chart. He turned to go. Then he stopped. "The rotation schedule," he said. "In his record. Who wrote that?" "He did," she said. "I transcribed it." Dennis nodded. Not the nod of a man who has finished thinking. The nod of a man who has just reclassified something he thought he understood. He walked away down the hall. That afternoon, Sergeant Marsh came back with Bram for the scheduled hour. Preeta let them in at the staff entrance and walked them to room 7 herself. She was trying to be casual about it. She was not succeeding. Marsh did not comment on this. At the door, Marsh paused. He had not said anything to Preeta in the corridor, but now he said, in the low voice of a man choosing his words, "You know who this animal is?" Preeta looked at him. "Bram." "No," Marsh said. "I mean, yes, but there's more." He had a folder under his arm. He had not mentioned it before, and he did not open it now. He just stood for a moment, with his hand on the doorframe. "Voss," he said. She knows who Hale is? Preeta frowned. She knows his chart. His record, Marsh said. His full record. Not the one in the ward. Preeta looked at him. There's a commendation, Marsh said. Flat, declarative. Classified citation. Bram and Hale together. Overseas. The dog found something that... It kept a lot of people from not coming home. He paused. The kind of citation that doesn't get announced. You just know, after, who was there. Preeta was very still. How did Voss know to call? Marsh said. She saw a note, Preeta said slowly. One line. The handler's name. The dog's name. That's all she had? That's all she had. Marsh looked down at Bram, who was sitting beside him with complete patience. Then she knew what she was doing, he said. She always does, Preeta said. He opened the door. Inside, when Corvin saw Bram come through the door, something that had been held very still in his face released. Not dramatically, not the way things release in films, just a quiet letting go, a single breath, an alignment of his posture. Bram walked to him and pressed his head against Corvin's knee and stayed there. Marsh waited until Corvin had both hands on the dog and was speaking quietly to him. Then Marsh cleared his throat. Corvin looked up. Marsh set the folder on the corner of the bed. There's something in there you should see, he said. Corvin looked at the folder. He did not touch it. It's the transfer documentation, Marsh said. Bram's placement. Permanent transfer, if you want it. Medical Services has a home care accommodation clause for service-connected handlers. The room was quiet. Bram lifted his chin from Corvin's knee and looked at Corvin's face. Corvin looked at the folder. Who filed the request? He said. His voice was careful. Marsh said nothing. He looked toward the door. Corvin followed his eyes. Ilsa was at the nurse's station at the end of the corridor, half visible through the glass panel beside the door. She was filling out a form with her back to the room, the pen moving in the quick, quiet way it always moved when she was writing something she had already thought through. She did not look up. Corvin watched her for a long moment. He picked up the folder. She filed this, he said, with Fairburn's signature and the program's liaison approval, Marsh said. But yes. Corvin opened the folder. He read the first page. He read it slowly. He set it on his knee, face down. Has she done this before? He said. For someone else. I couldn't say, Marsh said, but I wouldn't be surprised. Corvin looked at Bram. Bram looked at him with steady, unhurried attention, the kind of attention that does not need to be explained. She didn't tell me she was doing it, Corvin said. No, Marsh said. Why not? Marsh considered this with the expression of a man who is choosing between two honest answers. I think, he said, because she wasn't sure it would work, and she didn't want you to lose something twice. The room held the silence for a moment. Then, Corvin reached across and picked up the folder again. He turned to the signature page. He looked at the line where a patient's signature was required. He signed it. He put the cap back on the pen and held it out to Marsh and said, very quietly, "Tell her thank you." "Tell her yourself," Marsh said. Corvin looked at the glass panel. Ilsa was still at the station, still writing. He looked down at Bram. He took a breath. Then he stood up. 3 weeks later, Bram came to Ward 7 every morning at 8 o'clock. It was not an official protocol. It had become simply a fact, the way certain things become facts when enough people depend on them, something you plan your day around without consciously deciding to. Sergeant Marsh drove him, every morning, 40 minutes each way. When asked about this, he said only that his route took him close enough and that he had the time. Neither statement was precisely true, and everyone knew it, and no one said so. The patients in the rooms along the hall had learned Bram's schedule before the staff formally communicated it. They knew the sound of Marsh's boots on the linoleum and the particular click of Bram's nails on the polished floor, and they would orient toward the door the way plants orient toward light, quietly and without announcement. Corvin had been discharged by then, but he came back each morning with Bram. He brought Bram in on the lead and walked him slowly down the hall, pausing at each open doorway, at each room where someone reached out a hand. He had not been asked to do this. On one of those mornings, a small girl named Simone was visiting her grandfather in room 4. She was 6 years old and she wore red shoes, and she stood in the corridor with enormous gravity and watched Bram walk the hall and then looked up at Corvin with the directness that only very young children can sustain. "Is he working?" she said. Corvin crouched down to her eye level. "He is," he said. "What is his job?" Corvin thought about it for a moment. "His job," he said, "is to make sure no one is alone today." Simone considered this, with the seriousness it deserved. "That's a good job," she said. "It is," Corvin said. Her grandfather appeared in the doorway of room 4 then, leaning on the jamb, a thin man with a careful dignity about him. He had watched the exchange from the doorway. He looked at Corvin, and then at Bram, and then at his granddaughter, and he said, very quietly, "Some things need to be felt before they can be understood. The dog knows that. So does she." He looked down the hall. Ilsa was at the end of the corridor, in the morning light from the east windows. It was the same light that had been there on the first day, low and gold and unhurried. She had her notebook out, and she was writing something down. She was always writing something down. Bram turned in the hall and looked at her with the particular, patient attentiveness he reserved for the people who already knew what they were doing. Corvin straightened. He looked at her too. She looked up. She did not wave. She did not say anything. She just held his gaze for a moment, quietly, the way someone holds something they are not ready to put down. Then she went back to work. In the break room, on the wall above the coffee station, Preeta had taped a card. It was index card-sized, written in Marcia's unhurried block print. It read, "Some animals go where people cannot follow, and wait there until they are needed. Bram Hale. First day. Ward 7. Everyone on the ward had read it, some of them more than once. No one had moved it. And on certain mornings, when the light came in long and gold through the east windows, and the click of Bram's nails sounded in the corridor, the hall went very quiet for just a moment. Not a heavy quiet, a good one, the kind that comes not from absence, but from everything being, for once, exactly where it belongs. Some things need to be felt before they can be understood. The quiet ones know this best of all. If a story like this one has ever mattered to you, we hope you will stay with us. There are more of them here, waiting. Subscribe if you would like to be part of the community that keeps these stories alive. And we want to ask you something. Has there been a creature, a dog, a horse, any living thing, that reached someone in your life in a way that nothing else could? We would love to know. Leave your answer in the comments. We are listening.